Wyoming Territory, July 1882. The sun hung low over the Powder River Basin, throwing long shadows across the dry land when Peter McAllister spotted her. A figure stumbling down the wagon trail alone, dust clinging to her dress, bonnet hanging from her hand by a snapped ribbon. She looked more ghost than woman, but he knew right away she was real. He dropped the feed sack he was hauling and ran. "Miss!" he called, boots pounding the packed dirt. "Miss, wait!" She turned slow, like a deer too tired to run. Her lips were cracked, cheeks hollow, and her eyes, God, her eyes were so blue they hurt to look at under the scorched sun. Peter reached her just as her legs gave out. He caught her, arms strong and steady, and lowered her gently to the ground. "Water!" she rasped. He had his canteen unhooked in a second, bringing it to her lips. She drank in greedy gulps, water spilling down her chin, soaking the front of her torn dress. She coughed, then drank more. When she finally leaned back, her breathing was steadier. "Thank you," she said, voice hoarse. Peter crouched beside her, brushing a strand of dusty hair from her face. "You got a name?" She hesitated. Willow Sanders," she added after a moment. "I'm Peter McAllister. I live just over that rise. You can come with me. My pa and we got a place. You need rest." She flinched like a wounded animal. "I cannot stay long. I need to find someone." Peter studied her. Her dress was once fine but torn at the hem. Her boots were cracked, one missing the sole. She was no drifter. She had come from something and lost it. "Who are you looking for?" he asked gently. "My children." That hit him like a bullet. She looked no older than 25. "I had two. Zadie and Zeke. They were taken when our wagon was attacked 4 days ago. I ran. I thought I could find help. I have been walking since." Peter's chest tightened. "You walked 4 days with no horse? Nothing?" She nodded, eyes glassy. "I buried my husband last month in Kansas. We were headed west. I thought we could start new, but everything fell apart. I should have died with them." Peter shook his head, firm. "No. You are here for a reason. And I swear to you, Willow, I will help you find them. I will not let you go through this alone." Her lips trembled. "Why would you help me?" He gave her the canteen again. "Because you need it. And because I want to." He helped her to her feet, arm around her waist. She sagged against him but did not pull away. His homestead was a modest place tucked between cottonwoods and wheat fields, with a barn leaning a little and a house his pa built after the war. His father, Samuel, met them on the porch, gray-haired and wide-eyed. "She needs rest," Peter said as they crossed the yard. "She is staying with us." Samuel nodded without question and opened the door. That night, Willow slept in Peter's bed while he took the floor. He kept the lantern low and the windows open, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, knowing in his bones she had not slept in days. In the morning, she woke with tears on her cheeks. "I dreamed I held them," she whispered. "We will find them," Peter said, kneeling beside her. "I promise." She looked at him like she was not sure how to believe in promises anymore. They rode out after breakfast. Peter saddled his mare, Clover, and loaded supplies. Willow rode behind him, arms around his waist, head against his back. Her grip was light, but it steadied him. They tracked the wagon ruts east. Peter knew the land well, he had hunted it since he was a boy. By midday, they found the burnt remains of a wagon and blood in the dirt. Willow slid off the horse and collapsed beside the wreckage, hands shaking. "Zadie's doll," she whispered, lifting a charred scrap of fabric. Peter crouched beside her. "There are boot prints heading north. Not Apache. Not Sioux. These are white men." Willow looked at him, fierce now. "Then we follow." They rode north for hours. At dusk, they saw smoke curling above a line of trees and heard voices, men laughing, shouting, drunk. Peter tied Clover to a low branch and motioned for silence. They crept close, peering through the brush. 4 men sat around a fire. Nearby, a makeshift cage had been built with wagon wood. Inside were 2 children. Willow gasped, hand to her mouth. Zadie. Zeke. Peter squeezed her hand. Stay here. She gripped his arm. Please. Do not let them hurt them again. He nodded once. I will not. He moved like a shadow, quiet and close. He waited until 2 men wandered off to piss and another passed out with a bottle in hand. Then he struck. The last man went down with a blow to the jaw. Peter dragged him out of sight, took his knife, and ran to the cage. Zadie, a girl of about 8, stared up at him with wide eyes. Zeke, no older than 5, clutched her hand. Peter whispered, I am a friend. Your mama is here. Zadie blinked. Mama? Willow stepped into the firelight then, eyes full of tears, arms outstretched. Come here, my babies. The children cried out and ran to her, burying their faces in her dress. She dropped to her knees, gripping them so tight. Peter turned away, giving them the moment. He checked the passed-out men and made sure none would follow. Then he saddled Clover and pulled the children up first, then Willow. He walked beside the horse, leading them into the dark. They reached the McAllister homestead just before dawn. Samuel had hot bread ready and coffee boiling. Willow cradled her children, 1 in each arm, on the porch steps. Peter watched, heart full. Later, as he tucked a blanket around Zeke, Willow came to stand beside him. You saved us, she said. He looked at her. You saved yourself? I just helped. She stepped closer. You gave me water. You gave me hope. Peter touched her cheek. And I will give you a home, if you want one. A safe place. You and your children. Her hand found his. Do you mean that? I do. She leaned in and kissed him soft, grateful, real. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never wanted to let go. And he would not. The wind shifted over the plains 2 days later, carrying the scent of rain. Willow stood beneath the cottonwood behind the house, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing the washboard while Zadie braided wildflowers into her brother's hair. The boy tolerated it with solemn patience, legs swinging off the porch step. Peter nailed a new hinge onto the barn door, glancing up now and again. He'd never seen a woman work like that, quietly, steady, no complaint in the ache of her shoulders or the red rising on her arms from the sun. She didn't ask for help. Just picked up what needed doing and did it. When the clouds broke and drops began to fall, she didn't flinch. She tilted her face upward, eyes closed, mouth parted. The rain soaked into her hair, darkening it to near black. He crossed the yard, wiping his hands on his trousers. You'll catch your death in it. I won't, she said, voice low. You ever miss the sound of it, even when it hasn't been long? He studied her face, the lines grief had carved over weeks of walking. Sometimes. But it's better when you're under a roof. The last roof I had burned, she said, not looking at him. He glanced toward the children. There's a storm cellar. My ma kept it dry. We still use it when the wind gets mean. Her eyes met his. You think I'd leave them out in that? No, he said. I don't think you'd leave them for anything. She turned back to the basin. They've taken to this place. It scares me, how fast. Peter moved beside her, lifting the bucket. That's not a bad thing. It is when you don't know if it'll last. She handed him the soap. I don't want them to get used to something that might vanish. He set the bucket down slowly. Willow, this isn't a shelter someone lent you. This is your place now too, if you want it. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. That night, after the rain passed and the children were asleep, she found him in the barn brushing down clover. The lantern cast her shadow ahead of her. You always do that yourself? She asked, leaning against the stall. She's used to my touch, he said. Get skittish with others. Funny, Willow said. So do I. Peter turned to face her, brush still in hand. I know. She stepped closer. When I was 15, My father promised me to a man I never met. He was twice my age and had 2 sons already. I was expected to cook, clean, bear more. I didn't question it then. I just did what was expected. Peter stayed quiet, letting her speak. I left him 5 years later. Took my children and fled to my sister's farm in Kansas. She'd married young too. We buried our husbands the same spring. He set the brush down. You don't know me or past. She shook her head. I know. But I want you to know it. Because I'm not just a woman who got lost on the trail. I've made choices. Some bad. Some desperate. And I'm still learning how to trust. Peter stepped forward. Do you think I don't see that? That I don't know what it means for a woman to keep going when everything's been taken? She looked up at him, eyes steady. I'm not asking for pity. You wouldn't know how to take it if I offered. She gave a dry laugh. No, I wouldn't. He reached out, slow, and tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. But maybe you could take kindness. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. He let his hand rest along her jaw, thumb grazing her cheek. Kindness doesn't want anything back. But you do, she said softly. Don't you? I want what you want to give. No more. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. And if I can't give much yet, I'll wait. Willow leaned closer until her forehead rested against his chest. He held her there, barn quiet around them except for the horse's slow breath and the creak of the beams in the wind. She didn't speak again that night. But when she stepped back, her hand lingered in his. The next morning, she took a needle to the torn lining of his coat and stitched it without being asked. Zadie followed her into the garden, and Zeke ran barefoot in the rows between the squash. Peter watched from the fence line, hammer idle in his hand, and felt something shift beneath his ribs. Not fast. Just sure. They were staying. By mid-August, the fields behind the McAllister house had turned a pale gold, and the scent of sun-warmed wheat drifted through the windows. Willow stood at the kitchen table early, slicing apples thin while the dough waited under a cloth. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, sleeves pinned high, hair braided down her back to keep cool in the heat. Peter came in from the barn with his shirt clinging to his skin and a spatter of grain dust on his forearms. You didn't need to start baking before first light, he said, wiping his brow with the crook of his arm. I couldn't sleep, she answered, not looking up. Zadie was talking in her dreams again. Bad? Not this time. She was laughing. Said something about a pond and her toes in the mud. Peter leaned against the doorframe. Think she remembers Kansas? I think she remembers being loved, Willow said, voice soft. That's enough. He watched her roll out the crust, the steady rhythm of the pin against the board. You always bake when you're unsettled? I bake when I want things to feel ordinary. Peter stepped closer, wiping his hands. You ever had a place that felt like it could be yours? Not since I was a girl, she said, lifting the crust and settling it in the tin. There was a room with a slanted ceiling, and a curtain that blew in when the wind was strong. I used to imagine it was a ship's sail. I thought I'd go off somewhere when I was grown. He smiled faintly. You still could. I don't want to anymore, she said, brushing flour from her hands. I want something that stays. Peter reached for her wrist gently. It's here if you'll have it. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and turned back to the pie. By late morning, Zeke had wandered off toward the creek with a tin pail, and Zadie sat cross-legged by the porch, darning the edge of her sleeve with careful, deliberate stitches. Samuel was out checking the fence line, and the quiet settled thick between the trees. Peter hitched a mule cart and gestured to the bench. I'm heading to town. Supply run. Come with me. Willow hesitated. And leave the children? They'll be with my pa. He won't let them out of sight. She looked toward the porch. Zadie, she called. Watch your brother. We'll be back by supper. The girl gave a solemn nod. The road into Buffalo was dry and rutted, the wheels clattering until they reached the smoother stretch past the ridge. Peter drove with one hand on the reins, the other resting on his thigh. The sun was high, but the breeze was kind. Willow sat beside him, bonnet shading her eyes as she watched the hills pass. "I haven't been in a town since before," she said after a while. "I don't know what I'll feel." "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," Peter replied. "We'll stay long enough to get what we need. No more." When they reached the mercantile, Peter tied off the mule while Willow lingered outside, watching the way the townsfolk moved. A woman stepped out of the milliner's with a bright feather pinned in her hat, and a boy darted between wagons with a string of fish. Inside, the store smelled of leather and dried herbs. Willow moved slowly past the bolts of fabric and sacks of feed, pausing at the small shelf of books near the back. Peter brought a spool of thread and a tin of coffee to the counter, and the clerk looked from one to the other. "Didn't think you'd come back with company," he said. "She your kin?" "No," Peter said evenly. "She's with me." The clerk's eyes lingered a second too long. Willow met them, steady and unmoved, then turned back to the shelf. Peter took the parcel and offered his arm. "Ready?" She nodded. "There's a copy of Pilgrim's Progress. I used to read it to Zadie during storms. I'll come back for it," he said. "Let's get you home." Back on the wagon, she was quiet for a long time. Then, that man looked at me like I was something bruised. Peter didn't answer right away. "You're not." She turned to him. "You don't think folks will talk?" "They already do. Let them." "You're not worried?" He looked over at her. "I'm only worried about what you want. If you want to be here, I'll carry the rest." Willow reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. "I want to build something," she said. "Not from what I lost. From what comes next." Peter gave her hand the barest squeeze. "Then we'll build it." When they returned, the children were beneath the cottonwood, sharing a single peach. Samuel stood nearby with a wire in his hand, repairing a broken trap. Willow stepped down from the cart and crossed the yard. Zadie looked up, face sticky with juice, and Willow bent to wipe her cheek. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "Did you watch your brother well?" Zadie nodded. "He only wandered once." Willow pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's all I ask." That evening, after the table was cleared and the children were tucked under quilts, Peter found Willow on the porch with a shawl around her shoulders. The stars were just beginning to show. He sat beside her, boots silent on the wood. For a while either spoke. Then she said, "You asked once if I'd had a place that felt like mine." Peter turned toward her. "I think I'm sitting in it," she said. He reached for her hand again, and this time she laced their fingers without hesitation. The porch creaked beneath them, the night air cool and full of promise. And for the first time in years, Willow Sanders was not afraid of tomorrow. The first frost came early that year, edging the window panes with white lace before the wheat was fully cut. Willow stood barefoot on the kitchen floor, folding a towel into the basket she just finished mending. The wood stove burned low, its heat settling into the kitchen's corners. Outside, Zeke and Zadie swept leaves into piles beneath Samuel's watchful eye, bundled in wool scarves Willow had sewn from an old blanket. Peter came in, shaking the cold from his coat, a folded paper in his hand. "They're holding a harvest gathering in town next week," he said, setting the notice on the table. "Music, food. A preacher's coming to speak on the Sunday after." Willow's hands stilled on the cloth. "That sort of thing wasn't for women like me." "You're not what you were," he said gently. "You're what you chose." She crossed to the stove and lifted the kettle. "I'd rather stay close. The wind's shifting. Might mean more cold coming in." Peter leaned against the doorframe, watching her pour. "I wasn't trying to press." "I know," she said, then softer. "I just don't like eyes on me when I don't know what they're thinking." He nodded once, then crossed the room and touched her elbow. "I'll let it be." That night, she found him outside past dusk, stacking chopped wood by the barn. His lantern cast a soft pool of light around him, and the scent of cedar lingered in the air. You always work past dark? She asked, stepping into the circle of light. He straightened, brushing bark from his palms. Only when I'm behind. She looked down at her hands, then up again. I've been thinking about what you said. About the gathering. It was just a thought. I know. But I've never danced. Not once. Peter blinked. Never? Not even as a girl. There was a boy once he asked, but my father said no. Said dancing was for foolish folk with idle hands. Peter set the last piece of wood down and picked up the lantern. Then we'll fix that. He led her to the empty space beside the shed, where the grass had worn away from years of wagon turns. The moon hung high and full, casting enough light to soften the edges of everything. No music, Willow said, glancing around. Peter offered his hand. I'll keep the time. She hesitated, then laid her fingers in his. He drew her in slow, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers just firm enough. He began to hum low and steady, a tune neither of them knew but both could follow. They moved in slow circles, boots brushing earth, their breath visible in the chill. Willow didn't speak, didn't laugh, but her eyes were open, and she didn't look away. You're a steady lead, she whispered. You're easy to follow. When the song faded, they didn't let go. Her hand slid from his shoulder, resting lightly at his collarbone. I've never had someone do something just to give me a memory before, she said. Peter touched her cheek, rough thumb tracing just under her eye. You've never had someone stay long enough. I think I'm ready to be seen, Willow said. By people who don't know what came before. He nodded, slow and sure. We'll go to the gathering. She nodded back. But I want to wear something that's mine. Not something from the bottom of a trunk. There's a bolt of blue calico in town, he said. I've seen you look at it. I won't ask you to, you didn't ask, he said. She let out a long breath and leaned into him, her forehead resting against the hollow of his throat. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the fields whispered with the coming wind. Later, back inside, she washed Sadie's hands at the basin and tucked both children into bed with a story about a bird that lost its way and found a better home. Peter sat nearby, mending the heel of his boot, listening. When the fire burned low and quiet again filled the house, Willow poured water into the tin basin and stood behind Peter, running a cloth over the back of his neck. He looked up at her, eyes tired but warm. You don't have to, I want to, she said. He turned on the stool and caught her waist, holding her still. You're not a guest anymore, Willow. She took his face in her hands, thumbs beneath his jaw. I know. And when she bent to kiss him, it wasn't tentative anymore. It was sure. It was home. The morning of the gathering broke with a pale sky and the hush of windless air. Willow stood at the edge of the garden, her shawl drawn over her shoulders, watching as Peter hitched the wagon. Sadie sat on the porch step, clutching a pair of gloves too large for her, while Zeke swung his legs from the bench, humming a tune he'd learned from Samuel. Willow's dress, sewn by her own hand from the bolt of calico Peter had quietly purchased, fit snug at the waist and fell smooth to her ankles. The sleeves were neat, the buttons carved from bone. She hadn't worn anything new since before Kansas. She hadn't expected how strange it would feel to look in the mirror and see a woman who belonged somewhere. Sadie looked up. Mama, do we have to sit still when the music starts? Willow smiled. Only if your feet won't let you move. Samuel emerged from the barn with a wrapped parcel and handed it to Peter. You'll want to share this with the table. The preacher's wife has a sweet tooth. Is she the one with the cane and the pinched face? Peter asked. Samuel nodded. She'll talk about your pie for weeks if it's good enough. Willow stepped forward. It'll do. They set off down the road, the wagon creaking beneath them. Zadie clutched a basket of biscuits in her lap, careful not to crush them, while Zeke dozed against Willow's side. The fields blurred past in gold and brown, and the air carried the scent of earth cooling for winter. At the edge of town, the gathering was already swelling. Men in clean shirts leaned against wagon wheels, women arranged pies on long tables, and a trio of fiddlers tuned their strings near a raised platform. Children darted through the grass, chasing one another with shrieks of laughter. Peter helped Willow down, then lifted the children. He nodded toward a shaded spot beneath a sycamore. Samuel's already found a place to sit. Willow scanned the crowd. I don't think anyone here remembers me. Peter reached for her hand. They will now. They walked together across the field, the children trailing close. A few townsfolk offered nods, some curious, others kind. Willow met each gaze with quiet steadiness. No shame. No fear. A woman near the tables waved them over. Her auburn hair was pinned high, and her sleeves rolled back from flour-dusted arms. We've got room for another pie, she said. Is that apple? Willow handed her the tin. With nutmeg. And I didn't skimp on the butter. The woman grinned. I'm Clara. My husband's the blacksmith. You're McAllister's girl? Peter stepped in. She's Willow. Clara's eyes softened. Well, Willow, we're glad you came. Later, music rose from the platform, and the crowd parted to make room for dancing. Zeke and Zadie joined the other children, clapping along to the rhythm. Peter stood beside Willow, arms crossed loosely, watching the fiddlers with a thoughtful look. You still planning to ask? She said. Only if you're ready. She held out her hand. I've waited long enough. They moved into the clearing, the crowd parting around them. The music was bright and quick, but Peter kept his pace steady, his lead sure. Willow followed with ease, her skirts brushing the grass, her breath even. They turned once, twice, and then the rhythm slowed, the fiddlers easing into a waltz. Peter drew her closer, one hand firm at her waist. You're not shaking. I'm not afraid. He smiled. Neither am I. When the music ended, Heather stepped back. Around them, the crowd scattered into applause, but Willow didn't look away from him. You know, she said, I didn't think I'd ever come back to a place like this and feel like I belong. Peter brushed her hair behind her ear. You made it yours. They returned to the table, where Zadie was offering biscuits to the fiddlers and Zeke had fallen asleep against Samuel's knee. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the lanterns were lit, casting soft halos over the crowd. They stayed until the stars came out. Then Peter gathered Zeke in his arms and led the family to the wagon. On the ride home, Willow leaned her head against Peter's shoulder, her hand resting over his. I've been thinking, she said quietly, about what comes next. He looked down at her, the moonlight catching the edge of her cheek. Tell me. I want to marry you. Peter didn't speak at first. Then he said, I would have asked come spring. I don't want to wait, she said. Not because I need a name. Because I want a life. With you. He kissed her temple. Then we'll start it. They married beneath the cottonwood 3 days later, with Samuel standing behind them and the children beside. Clara brought bread, the preacher brought a psalm, and Peter carved their names into the beam above the door with a pocket knife handed down from his father. They built a room onto the house that winter, one with a slanted ceiling and a curtain that caught the wind just right. Zadie planted hollyhocks along the fence come spring. Zeke followed Peter through the fields, asking questions about weather and wheat. Willow kept the blue dress in a cedar chest, but she wore the bonnet Peter gave her every time they went to town. She never looked down again when folks met her eye. And when she stood at the edge of the porch at dusk, arms folded, watching her children chase fireflies while Peter sharpened his scythe in the grass, the wind carried the scent of cut hay, and something more enduring. She had come west with nothing, and now she had everything that mattered. The land, the children, the man beside her, and the peace she'd thought she'd never find.